At times, life presents you with opportunities to confront emotions you never anticipated, during moments you couldn't have predicted. Some situations are impossible to prepare for, regardless of your age or past experiences. This story is about one of those instances for me. I'm 62, and life has taught me much, but it has also taken a great deal. Drew was the love of my life, full of energy and passion, especially for flying, his dream job. For me, it was a constant source of concern, and one day, that concern became my reality. I lost him in a crash 10 years ago. Since then, I've been on my own. The only thing that remains from Drew is our son, Derek, who is 36 now and a successful engineer. He's my pride and joy, though sometimes I feel like a mere shadow in my own home as he gets lost in his own life. Derek's best friend, Brendan, is 38, and the two of them have been inseparable for years. Brendan is also a pilot, just like Drew. Perhaps that's why Derek views Brendan as more than just a friend. He feels like a part of his dad. I had gotten used to Brendan visiting often. He was always cheerful, kind, and helpful, and his friendship with Derek was unique. Even when Derek was away, Brendan was there for me. But when Derek told me he'd be out of town for a week last month, I had no idea that week would change my life. If you want to be one of the first to uncover these intriguing secrets, feel free to subscribe and make sure to turn on notifications. Watch the full video, as something at the end will truly surprise you. That week, with Derek away, I ended up alone with Brendan, which was never part of my plan. It was late afternoon, and I was returning from the store, bags in hand, but couldn't find my keys. I searched through my purse and pockets, but they were nowhere to be found, as if they had vanished into thin air. Just then, Brendan's car appeared, pulling up in front of me. He popped his head out the window, wearing that familiar, warm smile. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I think I've lost my keys," I replied, feeling helpless. "There's no spare inside either. I have no idea what to do." Without hesitation, Brendan jumped out of the car. "We'll figure it out," he said confidently, calling a locksmith. Within minutes, someone was on the way to open the door. While we waited, I said, "You remind me of Drew. He used to handle everything so quickly, just like you." Brendan looked a bit embarrassed, but there was also pride in his eyes. Once the door was open, I wanted to thank him. "How about a coffee?" "I owe you for running around like this," I said. We went inside and Brendan casually sat at the kitchen table. Until then, he had always been around when Derek was home, but this time it was just the two of us. As I made the coffee, we began chatting. I had always been intrigued by Brendan's life as a pilot, like Drew's, though it also worried me. I was well aware of the dangers of that profession and its loneliness, but Brendan's story was different. "I was married once," he said, taking a sip of his coffee, "but it didn't work out. Our lives were just too different. We loved each other, but we didn't fit together. It's been 4 years since we divorced." His voice was steady, though tinged with sadness. He must have noticed the pity in my gaze, because he quickly added, "Don't worry, I'm fine now. I'm more balanced, and everything in my life is where it should be." His honesty struck me deeply. Seeing both his strength and vulnerability made me respect him even more. After Drew, my view of men had shifted. It was rare to find someone who was both strong and able to express their emotions. I smiled and said, Derek never really thought about getting married. He's too wrapped up in his career. Brendan grinned slightly. I believe Derek will meet someone special. It's only a matter of time. Our conversation deepened, and it felt like we had known each other for years. Sure, we'd spoken before, but never so openly. We talked about Drew, Derek, and even Brendan's childhood. I shared the story of when I first met Drew, and Brendan listened with great interest. You're so lucky to have known someone like Drew, he said, his eyes distant for a moment. But I can't even imagine the pain you must have felt the day you lost him. I've always thought about how strong you must be to get through something like that. In that moment, I felt the sincerity of his words more clearly than ever. For years, I had avoided talking about Drew, but his words warmed something deep inside me. We spoke for hours, losing track of time. Just as Brendan was about to leave, he paused at the door, turned around, and slowly walked back to me. He opened his arms gently to give me a hug. Really, thank you so much, Lily, he said, his voice full of warmth, and his smile so sincere it calmed me. For a moment, I didn't know what to do, but then I instinctively hugged him back. As our bodies came closer, the atmosphere between us shifted. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. What I felt was indescribable. Electricity, a pull, an unease, but also a comfort. The warmth enveloped me, burning through my body and wrapping around my soul. It felt like a connection I had been searching for all these years, something finally falling into place. Brendan must have felt it too, the intensity of the moment deepening. He pulled me closer, and the hug seemed to last longer, the weight of it growing stronger. Our hearts raced, our breaths grew shallow. For a second, our eyes met, but no words were necessary. The hug spoke everything. Finally, he slowly pulled away, stepping back, his eyes still holding that charged look. Good night, Lily, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. I nodded in response, my heart still racing, and as the door closed behind him, a strange emptiness washed over me, mixed with unease. I couldn't yet understand what that hug meant, but the impact of that moment only grew with each passing minute. A few days passed, but Brendan's hug and that brief, powerful connection in his eyes still lingered in my mind. I tried to sort through the mixed emotions in my heart, pushing aside the age gap and my responsibilities to my family. That fleeting moment we shared seemed to fill a void, as if it had shifted something in time. Everything now felt connected to Brendan, and oddly enough, my thoughts of him only grew stronger each day. Despite my attempts to reason with myself, I couldn't ignore the feelings. One evening, I received a call from Derek. He told me he was extending his work trip by another week due to an overload of tasks. I didn't want to leave you alone, he said, but my work's piling up. Normally, Derek's extended absences would leave me feeling lonely, but this time, something felt different. It was as if peace had settled inside me, as though something was finally aligning, though I couldn't yet understand what. Everything seemed to fall into place. A few days later, I was in my car about to leave when it suddenly stalled. The engine stopped, and I couldn't get it to move. I felt helpless. The only person who came to mind was Brendan. "Brendan, can you help me? My car broke down, and I can't do anything here. Derek's out of town, and I'm stuck," I said, my voice tinged with sadness, but also a flicker of hope. There was a pause, and then Brendan's reassuring voice came through. "Let me help, Lily. My flight got canceled, so I'll come right over. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." When Brendan arrived, I felt a different kind of calm. He inspected the car, noticing how dirty everything was. "Looks like there's quite a bit of work here," he said with a grin. His calm confidence made me feel safe as he began fixing the car. I stood outside watching him work, admiring the strength and grace in his movements. Every step was so smooth, so natural, as though it were second nature to him. I realized how attractive it was to watch him work. His competence was extraordinary. As he finished up, he turned to me with a smile, asking, "Everything's good, right?" His voice was steady, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. I realized then that I needed to express my gratitude. "Brendan, I really appreciate it." I spoke, but something else was stirring within me. After all the help he had given and being covered in oil, we didn't have to rush back home. He could relax, maybe even take a shower. Brendan slightly tilted his head, looking surprised. "Well, yes, I'm a bit covered in oil," he said with a smile. "But after all this work, some relaxation sounds good." A sense of relief washed over me, and at that moment, I thought inviting him inside wouldn't be wrong at all. In fact, I found myself wanting to be a bit closer to him. "All right then," I said, taking a step forward. "The shower isn't far. Come on, I'll show you." We went inside, and I immediately led him to the bathroom. We stood so close that I could feel his warmth affecting me. Every gesture, every smile of his stirred something inside me, and I felt the spark inside me grow even more intense. It was hard to hold back, and even as I directed him to the bathroom, excitement filled me. While Brendan was in the shower, I moved to the kitchen to prepare dinner. My thoughts were racing, and yet I couldn't ignore how much space Brendan seemed to occupy around me with every move I made. As I worked quickly on the meal, I thought about how to thank him, while also becoming more aware of the building tension between us. The moment I decided to open a few bottles of wine felt different, even though it wasn't something I usually did. Something inside me urged me on. As I selected glasses and arranged the food, I felt a mix of emotions. I was losing myself, yet somehow I was still in control. When Brendan finished his shower and came into the room, he looked a little pale, but very calm. His wet hair and casual clothes gave him an effortless look that made him even more attractive. "It smells great in here," he said, walking toward the table, towel in hand. "You really went all out." "It's no trouble," I replied, a little excited. "Everything's ready. I hope you like it." He smiled, taking a step toward me. "It looks great. Shall we sit down?" As our eyes met, it felt like everything around us stopped. There was an electric energy between us, a closeness that intensified with every move. The table wasn't just filled with food. There was an unspoken tension, too. Brendan raised his glass and took a sip, then said, "You should have some, too. It's been a long day. Let's relax for a bit." We locked eyes, and I felt a warm calm settle over me. I raised my glass, wanting to share the moment. I set my thoughts aside and simply enjoyed our time together. The conversation flowed easily as we spoke about our lives. Brendan shared funny stories, and I talked about the past. There were quiet moments and laughter, but everything felt more meaningful. A few times, our hands brushed, each accidental touch heightening the intensity in our eyes. After dinner, as I began clearing the table, Brendan's hand brushed mine again. His touch lingered for a moment on my arm, and I could feel the emotions in his gaze. The tension inside me kept building. The way he looked at me made me feel something deep I hadn't felt before. Everything seemed to stand still, and though we were very close, there was still a noticeable gap between us. But for some reason, I didn't hesitate. I took a step closer to him. He stepped back, but then smiled and closed the distance between us. "You're such a beautiful woman, Lily," he said, his voice deep and confident. His words stirred something inside me. Looking into his eyes, I understood that everything was becoming clear. "You're a special guy too, Brendan," I whispered. "You make everything feel like it's meant to be." Silence hung for a moment, and in that instant, everything shifted. I took another step, and Brendan moved closer, gently wrapping his hands around my waist. What I felt wasn't just warmth from his hands, but the frantic beating of my heart. As he pulled me toward him, the distance between us vanished. Our hearts beat faster, breaths quickened, and in that moment, we were engulfed in each other's arms. Slowly, our lips met, and time seemed to disappear. Years of loneliness melted away. Everything from the past merged into that moment with Brendan. It felt like it wasn't a fleeting experience, but something that would last forever. Every touch, every kiss pulled us closer. We walked down the hallway, undressing as we went, our breaths shallow. When we reached the bedroom, Brendan drew me toward him again, and once more our lips met. It was done now. We were entirely connected. The rest of the world ceased to matter. Only Brendan and I existed in that moment. His touch transported me to another world. Every movement, every kiss deepened our connection. The night passed in each other's arms, and before sleep took me, I looked into Brendan's eyes and saw that he shared the same feelings. When I woke up, Brendan was still beside me. The first light of morning filtered through the room, casting soft rays on his face. I realized then that something had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. Brendan had become my light, my hope. When his eyes fluttered open and he saw me, a smile spread across his face. "Good morning, Lily," he said, his voice full of warmth. "Good morning, Brendan," I replied, smiling. "Last night was amazing." He pulled me closer and we kissed again. In that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, everything felt perfectly aligned, but something still lingered in the air. I saw a momentary hesitation in Brendan's eyes. "Lily," he said, his voice now more serious, "was this just a one-night thing, or is there more to it?" My heart raced. I didn't have the answer, but one thing was clear. I wanted to be with Brendan. This is just the beginning, I whispered. I want to explore what we can have together. Brendan smiled, holding me tighter. I want to be with you, Lily. I want to see where this leads us. In that moment, I felt the potential for a bright future, but we didn't know what would come next. All we knew was that we wanted to be together, and that was enough. If you've reached this point, I'm sure my story has touched you deeply. There's so much more to tell, and you won't want to miss it. Don't forget to follow, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm excited to hear what you think. Your support means everything to me.